Hi dudes and dames, and welcome. This has been a difficult video to make, since close to all aspects of the research end in tinfoil street. Looking for the statistics on the refugee crisis and the following crime, there seems to be a clear pattern to most of them. The numbers doesn't really seem to reflect anything that slightly resembles reality. Not really surprising, given that most of them are from entities with interests involved, e.g. European Union, UN, and various member states and philanthropic organizations. I'm not going to focus on statistics, but I will show you something that made me a little concerned. If you need to make it less obvious that things are getting out of control, first thing you'll need to do is obfuscate the statistics. As you see in the chart represented by the blue line, in 2014, they instituted that practice, showing only count of first-time asylum applicants, not including all those who have been in Europe for a long time, being denied and sent to the next EU country, and not all those who for years have been in constant loop from Africa to EU, only to be deported back to Africa and then repeat the cycle. I'm sure there are more I forgot. This is of course not taking into the account of illegal immigration. Just to show how ridiculously out of proportion this is, and then I'm not going to focus more on that. And this seemed to be the average quality of the crime statistics to whether it was EU or local nation. It is blatantly obvious when looking at the handling that we are talking in the millions of largely unvetted refugees, of which up to 42% are able-bodied men. This has not been the usual humanitarian emergency. There have been a huge group of people piggybacking on the crisis and getting a free pass as a hurt Syrian. The reasons are many. Up to, around, and certainly after the Syrians seriously needed evacuation, a lot of influential people and entities played their part in accelerating the problem. I'll try and list as many as I can. As for the main corridors, the refugees have been rather reliant on the more safe Turkey to Greece access, until this was shut off by an EU deal. Well, actually this means that ISIS supporting Turkey takes in and registers unvetted, undocumented people, whom are then, through EU, being pushed on to other nations. The second corridor, this won't be a surprise to many, is from Libya, crossing the Mediterranean into Italy, in mostly overloaded, close to incapable boats. Didn't Gaddafi say something about the huge amounts of violent opportunist migrants he was holding back? Well, either way, no one is holding them back now in a war-torn country. As most recall, the German, French and Swedish governments, along with several other nations, EU, UN and several philanthropic immigration organizations, went to the media and in one voice declared that anyone could come and get a place in the EU, we will feed, house and pay you. The EU countries who didn't agree in the approach was pressured through the EU membership, especially when the refugees actually came in masses. The ISIS supporting nations, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, were actively engaged not only behind the scenes, but publicly encouraging floods of migrants to seek for Europe. In one instance, Saudi Arabia vowed to build 200 mosques in Germany, which sparked a rather heated discussion. Even everyone's good friend George Soros has his fingers deep in this. I'll let Black Pidgeon speak.
In May, Viktor Orbán, the Prime Minister of Hungary, accused Mr. Soros, who was also born in Hungary, of deliberately encouraging the migrant crisis. This invasion is driven on the one hand by people smugglers, and on the other by those activists who support everything that weakens the nation-state. This Western mindset and this activist network is perhaps best represented by George Soros. After it was revealed that Soros's NGOs distributed handbooks to migrants in the Balkans which offered advice on how they could illegally enter Europe, Soros was condemned by the Hungarian government. Mr. Soros has now issued an email statement to Bloomberg claiming his foundations help uphold European values, while Mr. Orbán's actions in strengthening the Hungarian border and stopping a huge migrant influx undermine those values. His plan treats the protection of national borders as the objective and the refugees as an obstacle, Mr. Soros added. Our plan treats the protection of refugees as the objective and national borders as the obstacle. European Union supporter George Soros has claimed that Europe should take at least 1 million refugees every year and let them choose where they want to live. But he knows that Europe cannot afford to pay for all of this. In another interview, Mr. Soros has further admitted that it would be impossible for the EU to finance this expenditure out of its current budget, and so advocates their taking on additional debt instead. Mr. Soros states flatly that in part as a result, the EU is on the verge of collapse, and that the very survival of the EU is at risk. And when speaking specifically on the decision of the UK to leave the EU, he was very clear. Now the catastrophic scenario that many feared has materialized, making the disintegration of the EU practically irreversible. It's also been shown conclusively that the Merkel plan for Europe is in fact the Soros plan. Merkel, it would seem, like so many other politicians, is just another one of his puppets. In his latest article for the New Eastern Outlook, American author, researcher, and strategic risk consultant F. William Engdahl narrated that what was dubbed the plan turned out to be a string of inexplicable actions, including the violation of free speech, all to indulge the controversial and current Turkish regime. All of those seemingly inexplicable actions from the once pragmatic German leader appear to go back to her embrace of a 14-page document prepared by a network of pro-NATO think tanks, brazenly titled The Merkel Plan. Indeed, on October 4th, 2015, the European Stability Initiative, an international think tank with headquarters in Berlin, Istanbul, Brussels, and Vienna, issued the Merkel Plan, a proposal for the Syrian refugee crisis, which was strikingly similar to the strategy that the German Chancellor has since recently pursued in Europe. Suspiciously, the authors of the ESI plan titled their plan as if it had come from the German Chancellor's office and not from them. More suspicious is the contents of the Merkel plan of ESI. In addition to already taking more than 1 million refugees in 2015, Germany should agree to grant asylum to 500,000 Syrian refugees registered in Turkey over the coming 12 months. In addition, Germany should accept claims from Turkey and provide safe transport to successful applicants already registered with the Turkish authorities. And finally, Germany should agree to help Turkey obtain visa-free travel. Sound familiar? The million-dollar question that arises then is who is behind the European Stability Initiative. Current ESI chairman directly responsible for the final Merkel plan document is Istanbul-based Austrian sociologist Gerald Noss. Noss is also a member of the European Council of Foreign Relations and an Open Society Fellow. And in no surprise, the European Council on Foreign Relations is sponsored by Soros, and it is Soros who is the creator of the Open Society Foundations. Thus, already it becomes clear that the Merkel plan is the Soros plan in fact. And Mother Merkel, as she is known to her millions of new male migrants from Africa and the Middle East, is also the inspiration to the Democratic nominee for the President of the United States, Hillary Clinton. And like Mother Merkel, the tentacles of Soros envelop not only Hillary and her husband Bill, but the entire Democratic Party of the United States. Soros is the man Viktor Orban hears when Bill and Hillary Clinton open their mouths on democracy in Europe. Bill Clinton said recently that anti-migrant countries of Hungary and Poland decided democracy is too much trouble. Therefore, they want Putin-like leadership to keep foreigners out. Hungary's Orban slammed Bill Clinton as a puppet of billionaire George Soros for supporting his plan to flood the EU with millions of hostile Muslims. Beyond the American campaign, the remarks made about Hungary and Poland have a political dimension, Mr. Orban said, accusing Mr. Clinton of repeating Soros-inspired campaign lines. These are not accidental slips of the tongue, and the number of these slips or remarks have been multiplying since we are living in the era of the migrant crisis. And we all know that behind the leaders of the Democratic Party, we have to see George Soros. And Thomas Poreba, a former advisor to the Committees on Foreign Affairs and Regional Development in the European Parliament, alleged that Bill Clinton's recent foreign policy gaffe over Polish democracy was merely him following the orders of George Soros. But it wouldn't be too far of a stretch. Soros is the #1 contributor to Hillary Clinton's run for the president. Moreover, WikiLeaks has released emails that show that Hillary had an open door for Soros, and they showed he conclusively held much sway over Clinton when she was Secretary of State under the Obama administration. Soros wants to curtail American sovereignty. Soros would like nothing more than to see America become subservient to international bodies. He wants more power for groups such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, while even saying the U.S. role in the IMF should be downsized. He wants the destruction of the nation-states of Europe and the elevation of the EU, while at the same time destabilizing nation-states for his own profit. He's paradoxical, and while he helps flood the continent with millions of unassimilatable migrants that the continent can ill afford, not only has he said that the EU may not survive the crisis that he's helping to engineer, but that even if the bloc does manage to hold together, its future is bleak.
But wouldn't normal border control have stopped the actual flow? Yes, it would have, if it had been applied. The highest governmental entity who pushed for open borders is bunk buddies with Mr. Soros, the UN. The place where Saudi Arabia is leaders of the Human Rights Council investigating its own war crimes in Yemen, and countries who speak against the club is voted off the island. So let's take a look at this migrant thing in the UN and who were actually a part of making this happen. See, this guy, Peter Sutherland, the special representative of the Secretary General of International Migration, seems to be a little busy bee and is caught up in several interesting things. As you see, a remarkable reference he have here. I like how he simultaneously with this UN job holds chairman of both British Petroleum and Goldman Sachs International. Surely that doesn't influence his job. Oh well, he seems like a swell guy, doesn't he? Needless to say, migrants are just a means to an end, the end of nations. Surely this global entity known as Goldman Sachs, whose criminal and unethical business model can only be described in its entire scope using the word bankster, haven't got anything to do with UN. Okay, what I have shown here of articles listed in this description is merely suggestions. I strongly recommend that you look into this further to catch the entire scope of it. I hope this paints a picture of where the real problem stems from, and that this for a large part are not refugees as we are used to, which I will attempt to show in a coming video. Thanks for watching.